Jax's revenge domain.
Look. She slid the termination papers across the conference table and told me to sign and walk away. Your services are no longer required, Sarah Phillips said, her voice cold as a Colorado winter morning. Here's the thing. I smiled, pulled out my pen, and added one handwritten line that would cost Mountain Defense Solutions $18 million. My name is Howard Patterson, and I'm 56 years old. For exactly 20 years, from March 2005 to November 2025, I served as Chief Technology Officer at Mountain Defense Solutions, a defense contractor specializing in radar systems and military electronics. We're based in Colorado Springs, right in the shadow of Cheyenne Mountain and NORAD. When I started, Mountain Defense was 5 guys in a strip mall office with $800,000 in revenue. By 2005, we had 156 employees generating $180 million annually. I built every technical system from the ground up, developed 8 proprietary radar detection algorithms, and held patents worth millions. But, listen, the real reason I mattered, the reason nobody understood until everything fell apart, was buried in Article 12, Section 4 of my original 2005 employment contract. The whole thing starts in February 2005, when Mountain Defense existed only as a concept. George Steele, 58, was a former Air Force colonel who'd spent 30 years developing radar systems for the military. His daughter Linda, 35, was a project manager with top-secret clearance. Peter Collins, 52, was George's old Air Force buddy who understood government contracts inside and out. And Nancy Collins, 49, Peter's sister, handled business development and knew everyone worth knowing in defense procurement. They had big ideas, but zero technical leadership. The Air Force was modernizing radar systems for homeland defense after 9/11, and these guys needed someone who could bridge military requirements with cutting-edge technology. That's where I came in. In 2005, I was 35 years old, working as a senior radar engineer at Lockheed Martin down in Denver, earning $75,000 a year. I had 12 years of experience, a master's in electrical engineering from Colorado School of Mines, and a growing reputation for solving problems that made other engineers throw up their hands. But I was stuck in corporate bureaucracy, watching my innovations disappear into committee meetings and PowerPoint presentations. George approached me at a defense industry conference on February 15, 2005. Guy walked right up, introduced himself, described his startup vision, and asked if I'd consider joining as their founding CTO. No beating around the bush. What's the compensation? I asked him straight out. $65,000 to start, he said. I know that's a pay cut, but we're offering something more valuable. He handed me a preliminary contract, 31 pages of standard employment stuff, benefits, vacation time, the usual. But attached at the end was Article 12, Founder Protections and Equity Participation. That caught my attention fast. Article 12, Section 4 was the kicker. Employee is designated as a founding technical executive and granted founder protections equivalent to founding partners. In the event of employee's involuntary termination without documented cause, or voluntary resignation with complete settlement of all outstanding obligations, employee shall receive immediate vesting of 4% equity ownership, calculated at fair market valuation at time of separation. Let me break that down for you. If they fired me without legitimate cause, or if I quit while demanding complete payment of everything they owed me, I'd immediately own 4% of whatever the company was worth when I walked out the door. In 2005, 4% of Mountain Defense was worth maybe $15,000. But here's what made it interesting. The clause had no ceiling, no cap. If the company grew to $500 million, my 4% was worth $20 million. "Why are you offering this?" I asked George. He looked me dead in the eye. "Howard, I'm 58 years old. I've seen good people get screwed over by corporate executives who care more about quarterly reports than loyalty. I want someone committed to this organization for the long haul, someone who'll stick around when things get tough. This clause makes you a founding partner in everything but title. You'll protect us because protecting us protects your future. And if we hit it big, you get rich right alongside us." I went home and thought about it for a week, really chewed on it. On February 22nd, 2005, I called George back. "I'll accept your offer, but I want one modification to Article 12. "What kind of modification?" "I want the contract to specify that I retain the right to add handwritten amendments to any termination document, and that those amendments become legally binding when signed by both parties." George was quiet for a moment. "Why would you need that?" "Because if some future executive tries to force me out with a pre-written termination agreement, I want the explicit right to modify it. I want it documented that I can add provisions and they're binding. Call it insurance." George actually laughed at that. "You're thinking like a founder already. I like it." Agreed. The final contract included this language: "Employee retains the explicit right to add handwritten modifications to any termination or separation agreement. Any separation agreement containing complete settlement of obligations shall trigger employees' founder protections unless specifically disclaimed in writing by both parties." I signed on March 1st, 2005. George, Linda, Peter, and Nancy all witnessed it. The document was notarized by George's lawyer and filed with the Colorado Secretary of State as part of the company's incorporation records. Official as it gets. Looking back, that was the smartest thing I ever did. Over the next 20 years, I built Mountain Defense's entire technical foundation from scratch. By 2008, I'd developed our first proprietary radar algorithm for detecting stealth aircraft, technology that's still classified. By 2012, we had 3 major Defense Department contracts worth $45 million. By 2018, our systems were protecting military bases in 12 countries. By 2025, I held 8 patents in my name, managed a team of 45 engineers, and our radar technology was considered among the best in the industry. The money got better too. I was earning $165,000 annually by 2025 and had been offered the CEO position twice. I turned it down both times because I preferred hands-on engineering to corporate politics. Plus, I never forgot about Article 12, Section 4. Every single year, I'd pull out my original contract and read every word. I kept one copy at home in a fireproof safe, another with my lawyer, and verified annually that the clause remained valid under current corporate bylaws. I always knew somebody would eventually try to push me out. I just didn't expect it to happen the way it did. The beginning of the end started on September 12, 2025, when George Steele died. George was 78 at that point, still coming to the office 3 days a week, still reviewing major contracts with the same sharp eye he'd had since the Air Force. Guy had a massive heart attack at home around 6 a.m. and was gone before the paramedics got there. The funeral was September 16th. I'm talking about the whole company showing up. All 156 employees, dozens of clients, military personnel from 3 different bases. Hell, we even had a 2-star general from NORAD there paying his respects. I gave a speech about how George had taught me that integrity wasn't just about following regulations. It was about building things that actually worked when people's lives depended on them. After George died, Linda became chairwoman of the board. Peter stayed on as president. Nancy continued as VP of Business Development. But here's the thing. They were exhausted. The company had grown way beyond what any of them could handle day to day. George had been the driving force, the guy who made final decisions, and without him, they were drowning in operational details. Linda called me into her office about a week after the funeral. "Howard, we need to talk about the future. What's on your mind? Dad built this company to $180 million in revenue, but we can't keep running it the way he did. Peter's 72, Nancy's 69, and I'm 55, with grandkids I'd like to actually see while they're still kids. We need professional management. I saw where this was heading. You're thinking about bringing in an outside CEO. We have to. The board's already approved it. We're hiring an executive search firm. What about me? I've been here 20 years. I know this business inside and out." Linda looked uncomfortable. "Howard, you're brilliant at engineering, but this company needs someone with broad operational experience, someone who's scaled companies before." That stung, but I kept my mouth shut. These people had been good to me for 2 decades. If they wanted to bring in outside management, that was their call. I just didn't expect what came next. On October 8th, 2025, the board announced they'd hired Sarah Phillips as CEO. 38 years old, MBA from Wharton, previously a senior consultant at McKinsey, specializing in operational efficiency for defense contractors. Her LinkedIn was full of buzzwords about digital transformation and lean operational frameworks. Every instinct I had started screaming danger. Sarah began October 15th, 2025. Her first week, she spent touring the facilities, sitting in on engineering meetings, asking lots of questions about our processes. Seemed harmless enough. Then she dropped the bomb. Her first major decision was hiring an external consulting firm called Peak Operational Consulting to conduct what she called a comprehensive efficiency assessment. Cost: $285,000. I challenged this during the October 22nd executive meeting. "Sarah, we just finished our annual strategic review back in August. What exactly are we analyzing that we don't already understand?" She gave me this tight smile. "Howard, when was the last time independent experts evaluated our operations with fresh eyes? We have annual financial audits from KPMG. We have quarterly board performance reviews. We've got compliance audits from the Defense Department every 18 months. We get evaluated constantly. I'm talking about operational efficiency, not compliance. Peak specializes in identifying cost reduction opportunities for defense contractors. They've helped companies like ours reduce operational expenses by 25 to 40%. Translation: they specialize in firing expensive senior employees and replacing them with cheaper alternatives. The consultants showed up November 1st. 3 guys in their late 20s, all McKinsey alumni, all with 0 actual defense industry experience. They spent 3 weeks wandering around with clipboards, interviewing department heads, analyzing organizational charts, and comparing our compensation to industry benchmarks they'd pulled from some database. I watched them work and knew exactly what was coming. These guys had a playbook, and step 1 was always eliminating high-cost senior positions. I'd seen it happen at Lockheed, at Boeing, at every major defense contractor. Bring in consultants, identify redundancies, outsource technical functions, cut payroll by 30%, then wonder why projects start failing and contracts get canceled. On November 18th, they presented their findings to the board. I wasn't invited to the presentation. That was the first real warning sign. But Linda called me that evening, and I could hear the strain in her voice. "Howard, we need to talk. Can you come by the house?" I drove over to her place in the Broadmoor area. Linda and her husband Dan were sitting at their kitchen table with a bottle of wine that looked like they'd already made serious progress on it. "The consultants recommended eliminating several senior positions," Linda said without preamble, Including yours. I felt my stomach drop, but I kept my voice steady. On what basis? They claim your role could be outsourced to an Indian engineering firm for 40% less cost. Bangalore Solutions, apparently. They say most of your functions can be handled remotely, and the cost savings would be substantial. Linda, that's insane. You can't outsource classified defense work to India. Half our projects require security clearances. The other half involve proprietary algorithms that took me 15 years to develop. I know. Peter and I both argued against it. Nancy fought tooth and nail. But Sarah presented a compelling case to the board about modernization and cost competitiveness. What about my contract? Article 12, Section 4? Linda looked confused. What's Article 12? My founder equity clause. If they terminate me without documented cause, I receive 4% of the company at current fair market valuation. There was this long, heavy silence. Linda and Dan looked at each other. Howard, Linda said slowly. What's the company worth? Currently? I'd been tracking this religiously for years, especially since George got sick. It's part of being a good CTO. You need to understand your company's value, not just its technology. Over the past 18 months, we'd received 3 serious acquisition offers. The first came in June 2024 from Ares Defense Partners, a private equity firm. $380 million cash. We declined because George wasn't ready to sell. In January 2025, a Canadian defense contractor called Maple Defense Systems offered $420 million, mostly stock with a 3-year lockup. Too risky, too illiquid. The most recent offer came in September 2025, just days after George's funeral. A Silicon Valley growth fund called Redpoint Defense offered $450 million, clean and unconditional cash deal. The timing felt predatory, and the board, still grieving, tabled it indefinitely. But those offers established fair market value pretty clearly. Linda, I said, meeting her eyes, 4% of $450 million is $18 million. Dan nearly choked on his wine. Linda went pale. Jesus Christ. Does Sarah know about this clause? I doubt it. Half the corporate records are still sitting in boxes in George's old office. When HR migrated to digital files back in 2020, they only scanned the main contract pages, not the exhibits or amendments. My guess is nobody's looked at the original incorporation document since 2005. Howard, Linda said carefully, can you just not invoke it? Accept a severance package? Leave quietly? I looked at this woman who'd been like family to me for 20 years. Her father had trusted me with the technical heart of his company. I'd worked nights and weekends to build something we could all be proud of. I'd turned down job offers from Boeing, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, all offering 30% higher pay, because I believed in what we were building here. And now some 38-year-old MBA with a PowerPoint wanted to ship my life's work to Bangalore to save money on her quarterly P&L. Linda, I've given this company 20 years of my life. I've built technology that protects American soldiers overseas. I've turned down better offers to stay loyal to your family's vision. And now some consultant who's been here 3 weeks wants to eliminate me to improve some efficiency ratio? I paused, choosing my words carefully. No. If they want me gone, they're going to pay exactly what my contract says I'm worth. Linda couldn't stop it from happening. 3 days later, on November 25th, 2025, at 2:45 p.m., I got an Outlook calendar invite from Sarah's assistant. Personnel discussion. Howard Patterson. 3:00 p.m. Executive conference room. Required attendance. No agenda. No HR representative listed. Just cold corporate efficiency. I showed up at 2:58. Sarah was already there, sitting at the head of that polished walnut conference table in what looked like a $2,000 suit. Her whole posture screamed authority she hadn't earned through 20 years of building anything, just authority that came with a title. In front of her was this burgundy leather portfolio with the Mountain Defense logo embossed in gold. "Howard, please sit." I sat down. She didn't offer coffee, didn't thank me for my service, didn't acknowledge 2 decades of loyalty. "I'll be direct," she said, like that was some kind of virtue. "We've decided to restructure technical operations. Your position is being eliminated effective December 31st. We're outsourcing core engineering functions to Bangalore Solutions. They can provide the same services at 40% less cost." She slid the portfolio across the table like she was dealing cards. "This contains your separation agreement and final compensation package." I opened it slowly, reading every word. 10 weeks of severance pay. $25,384 gross. Health insurance continuation for 90 days. Standard non-disclosure agreement, non-compete clause, confidentiality provisions. All the usual legal language designed to keep terminated employees quiet and compliant. Then I saw the magic words at the bottom of page 3. "Employee acknowledges this agreement constitutes complete settlement of obligations between employee and company." Those 6 words, complete settlement of obligations, were exactly what I'd been waiting 20 years to see. Article 12, Section 4 of my original contract defined them as the specific trigger phrase that activated my equity vesting clause. Sarah had copied the language from some generic HR template, completely blind to the landmine she was about to step on. I pulled out my pen, same black Pilot G2 I'd been carrying for 15 years, and clicked it once. "Sarah, I'd like to make one small modification to this agreement." Her eyes didn't even look up from her phone. "This package isn't negotiable, Howard. Sign it or don't sign it. If you don't execute this by 4 o'clock today, we'll proceed with termination for cause, and you'll receive nothing except your final paycheck." "I understand. Just need to add one small provision. My original contract allows handwritten modifications to separation agreements." She waved her hand dismissively, still scrolling through emails. "Fine. Make it quick. I have a call with the board at 4:30. In clear, careful cursive, the same handwriting I'd used to sign patents and contracts for 2 decades, I wrote, "Pursuant to Article 12, Section 4 of Employment Agreement, dated March 1st, 2005, employee invokes founder protections and equity vesting at 4% of fair market valuation." I initialed it HP and signed Howard Patterson with the date. Sarah barely glanced at what I'd written. She was already reaching for her Mont Blanc pen, signing with a flourish. "Sarah Phillips, Chief Executive Officer," adding the date, and snapping the portfolio shut. "Excellent. HR will process your final compensation and benefits. You can work through December 31st to ensure proper knowledge transfer, or you can leave immediately. Your choice." "I'll work through December to make sure the transition is handled properly," I said, standing up. Wouldn't want to leave any loose ends. At 3:23 p.m., I walked out of that conference room, got in my truck, and drove straight to Diana Rodriguez's law office. Diana had been handling my legal work since 2018. Employment contracts, patent filings, that kind of thing. Smart woman. Former JAG officer who understood both military culture and corporate law. I walked into her office at 4:15 with the signed separation agreement. "Diana, I need you to look at something." She read the standard termination language, then got to my handwritten edition. Her eyebrows went up. "Howard, what exactly is Article 12, Section 4? I pulled out a copy of my original 2005 employment contract from my briefcase. Always carried it with me just in case. Diana read the founder equity clause twice. Jesus Christ, Howard. Do they know what they just signed? I seriously doubt it. Half the board doesn't even know my original contract exists. What's the company worth? Latest acquisition offer was $450 million in September. Conservative estimate, we're looking at $18 million. Diana leaned back in her chair and whistled. This is either brilliant or completely insane. You just triggered an $18 million payout based on a 20-year-old clause that nobody remembers. By 6:30 p.m., we'd made 4 copies of the signed agreement. One went into my fireproof safe at home. One into Diana's encrypted case files. One into my safe deposit box at First National Bank. And one got filed with the El Paso County Clerk's office as a precautionary public record. Howard, Diana said as I was leaving, give them 24 hours to figure this out themselves. If they don't contact us by tomorrow evening, we send a formal demand letter Thursday morning. I went home, grilled a steak, opened a beer, and waited. The explosion came at 8:47 the next morning. I was in my office reviewing some patent applications when the shouting started from the executive wing. Who authorized this? Who the hell let him sign this? That was Peter Collins's voice, and he sounded like he was having a stroke. The whole engineering department could hear him storming down the hallway. He burst into my office with his face red as a fire engine, holding the separation agreement in his fist like he wanted to set it on fire. Howard! My office! Right now! We walked past Sarah's office. Through her glass door, I could see her on the phone, gripping the edge of her desk with white knuckles, looking like she'd just watched her career explode in real time. In Peter's office, he slammed the door so hard that a framed photo of his Air Force squadron fell off the wall. "What the hell did you do?" he said, waving the contract. I signed a separation agreement, exactly as requested. You added some clause about Article 12 and founder protections and 4% equity vesting. Do you have any idea what that means? I kept my voice calm and level. It means 4% of fair market valuation. Based on recent acquisition offers, that's 4% of $450 million, which comes to $18 million. Peter stared at me like I'd just told him aliens had landed in the parking lot. $18 million? You're claiming we owe you $18 million? I'm not claiming anything, Peter. Sarah signed an acknowledgement of it yesterday at 3:23 p.m. That makes it legally binding under Colorado contract law. The color drained from his face. This is insane, Howard. We offered you $25,000 in severance. That's generous considering the circumstances. Generous? I stood up. 20 years of 60-hour weeks. 20 years of building technology that protects American soldiers. 20 years of turning down better offers to stay loyal to George's vision. And you think $25,000 is generous? I walked to his window, looked out at the mountains where I'd been working in George's shadow for 2 decades. Peter, Article 12 wasn't some accident. George wrote that clause specifically to protect founding contributors from exactly this situation, from executives who value cost-cutting over loyalty. Peter was quiet for a long moment, jaw working like he was chewing nails. "We'll fight this," he finally said. "We'll tie this up in court for years." "You'll lose," I said, turning back to face him. "Article 12 is part of my employment contract, filed with the Colorado Secretary of State as part of Mountain Defense's incorporation documents. You, Linda, Nancy, and George all witnessed my signature in 2005. It's been in effect for 20 years without amendment or challenge. Sarah's separation agreement explicitly contains the trigger phrase, complete settlement of obligations. I invoked my contractual right with a handwritten modification, exactly as permitted under the original terms. She signed acknowledgement twice, once on the agreement itself, once on the transmittal cover page. I paused, letting that sink in. You have zero legal basis to challenge it. Your only options are paying what the contract requires, or facing a breach of contract lawsuit you'll definitely lose, along with my attorney fees and probably punitive damages for bad faith. Peter Collins, tough old Air Force veteran who'd survived 30 years of military procurement battles, looked like he'd just been hit by a truck. 3 hours later, Diana called me. "Howard, I just got off the phone with Mountain Defense's general counsel. They want an emergency meeting this afternoon. They're claiming there's been a contractual misunderstanding." "Did you tell them there's no misunderstanding?" "I did. I told them their CEO signed a legally binding document that references a valid recorded employment contract. If they want to discuss settlement, the only number on the table is $18 million plus accrued interest." "What did they say?" They hung up. "But I'm expecting a lawsuit filing by end of business today." She was right. At 4:17 p.m., a process server in a cheap suit showed up at my desk with a manila envelope. Inside, Mountain Defense Solutions versus Howard Patterson, filed in El Paso County District Court. They were seeking a declaratory judgment that Article 12, Section 4 was unenforceable due to unconscionability, changed circumstances, and lack of mutual consideration. Basically, they were arguing that no reasonable company in 2025 would honor a clause written in 2005 for a company that was worth practically nothing back then. The hearing was set for December 18, 2025. Judge William Barnes presiding, former corporate attorney himself, about 60 years old, reputation for no-nonsense rulings. Mountain Defense brought in the big guns. Richard Murphy from Hartwell and Associates, one of Denver's most expensive law firms. Guy probably billed $850 an hour and wore suits that cost more than most people's cars. "Your Honor," Murphy began, standing there like he was arguing before the Supreme Court. "This clause represents a drafting anomaly that escaped revision for nearly 2 decades. No rational board of directors would permit a single employee, regardless of tenure or contribution, to claim 4% of a $450 million enterprise based on a termination agreement. The financial disparity is so extreme it shocks the conscience." He went on like that for 20 minutes, using a lot of fancy legal words that basically boiled down to, "This isn't fair." Diana stood up when it was her turn. No theatrics, just facts. "Your Honor, this clause wasn't an oversight. It was intentional." In 2005, Mountain Defense had no technical infrastructure, no patents, no defense contracts. They had IRS problems and a failing business model. Howard Patterson brought expertise, credibility, and quite literally survival to this company. In exchange, the founders, sophisticated, experienced military professionals, granted him equity protection equivalent to a founding partner. She walked over to the evidence table and picked up my original contract. For 20 years, Mountain Defense benefited from Mr. Patterson's innovations. He developed 8 patents that generated millions in licensing revenue. He built technical systems that protected American military personnel overseas. He turned down competing offers that would have paid him 30% more because he believed in this company's mission. Diana paused, looking directly at Judge Barnes. Now a new CEO, hired without reviewing historical employment contracts, terminates him with a generic severance package, includes the specific trigger language defined in his original agreement, and signs his handwritten contract modification without reading it. That's not unconscionability, Your Honor. That's corporate negligence. Judge Barnes took his time. He read Article 12 aloud, word by word. Then he read Sarah's termination agreement. Then my handwritten addition. "Counsel," he said, looking at Murphy. "Did Ms. Phillips sign this separation agreement after Mr. Patterson added his handwritten modification?" "Yes, Your Honor, but she didn't fully comprehend the financial implications. So she had the opportunity to read what she was signing. She chose not to read it carefully, and she signed anyway." "That's correct, but Your Honor—" Judge Barnes held up his hand. "Mr. Murphy, contracts are the foundation of business relationships. When parties sign agreements, they're bound by the terms, not by their later regrets about those terms. Mr. Patterson negotiated in good faith in 2005. He performed with distinction for 20 years. He invoked a contractual right that was always there, always valid, always enforceable." The judge leaned forward. "Mountain Defense's disappointment about the financial consequences doesn't void their obligations. Motion denied. Article 12, Section 4 is valid and triggered. Mr. Patterson is entitled to 4% of fair market value as determined by independent appraisal. I swear you could have heard a pin drop in that courtroom. The valuation process took 6 weeks. 2 firms, Lincoln Financial and Duff & Phelps, conducted parallel analyses. They looked at recent acquisition offers, revenue multiples for similar defense contractors, our patent portfolio, client retention rates, and projected growth in the homeland security market. Their consensus: Mountain Defense Solutions was worth $450 million. 4% of that, $18 million. On February 14, 2026, Valentine's Day, which I found ironically appropriate, the wire transfer hit Diana's client trust account. Here's where the math gets interesting. $18 million sounds like a fortune until the government gets involved. Federal taxes at 39.6% for that income bracket, plus Colorado state taxes at 9.9%. Total tax bite, 49.5%. After taxes, I netted $9.1 million. Still not complaining. The fallout was swift and brutal. Sarah Phillips was terminated December 20th, 2 days after the court ruling. Her LinkedIn now lists her as a strategic advisor, but everyone in defense contracting knows she hasn't had a real job since. Word travels fast in our industry. The board called her hiring the single costliest mistake in company history. Not just my payout, but the $350,000 in legal fees, the damaged relationships with key employees, the shattered morale throughout the engineering department. By April 2026, Linda, Peter, and Nancy decided they'd had enough. They sold Mountain Defense to Ares Defense Partners, the same PE firm that had made the $380 million offer back in 2024 for. Final sale price, $410 million, about $40 million less than the September appraisal, because my equity payout had already been deducted from the company's net worth. Linda, Peter, and Nancy each walked away with enough money to retire comfortably to Arizona and Florida. They deserved it. They'd built something valuable and sold it on their own terms. The new owners gutted the company within 6 months, laid off half the engineering staff, moved operations to a cheaper facility in Texas, outsourced most of the technical work to, you guessed it, Bangalore Solutions. Most of our key patents ended up getting shelved because the new management didn't understand how to implement them. As for me, at 56, I'm done worrying about corporate politics and quarterly earnings reports. My portfolio, properly invested in municipal bonds and index funds, generates about $365,000 annually in passive income. More than enough to live well without kissing anybody's ass. I do some consulting work for smaller defense contractors, helping them avoid the kind of mistakes Mountain Defense made. And I teach a course in engineering ethics at Colorado School of Mines, where I tell my students the story of those 9 words I wrote in blue ink. Not to brag, but to teach them something important. Sometimes the most valuable power isn't in your job title or your salary. Sometimes it's in reading the fine print, keeping your promises, and remembering that loyalty should run both ways. Sarah Phillips learned that lesson the hard way. Cost her $18 million. To figure it out, best money I never spent. Here's what I learned after 30 years in corporate America. They'll smile and call you family right up until the spreadsheet says you cost too much. But if you're smart enough to read the contract and patient enough to wait for your moment, sometimes you can make them pay exactly what loyalty is really worth.